What is up, Facebook land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And before I introduce my boy, Jay Niblick, I want to first dedicate the show as I always do, but this time I'm going to be a little bit selfish. Had a really good meeting today. Jay was involved with it, with my partner, Jason Griggs, just about the future of the max out, the business and where we're going. And, this past month, we installed two of our newest pieces of equipment, our new patented piece of equipment, the E-Force line of equipment with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I just want to dedicate Max Out tonight and everything that it is, from every client we've ever trained, every rehab patient we've ever worked with, every employee we ever had, every high, every low, every pitfall, every mistake, every bad business decision. Max Out has been an almost 11-year journey to get to where we are. And if it wasn't for Jason's belief in me and vice versa, and a lot of people who behind the scenes have helped to get us to where we are, we wouldn't be at this point today where we're launching a brand new piece of equipment with the possibility of really doing some damage in the strength and conditioning world and rehab world. So that's my dedication on a little bit selfish level. Where can you hear me? Where can you hear the podcast? You can hear it on iTunes. You can hear it on Stitcher, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, anywhere that podcasts are at. You can pretty much find me. Now, my boy Jay. I don't have to read anything to tell you his bio. I know it by heart. He's one of my best friends. I put in a post earlier. He's in my 5, and what I mean by that is if I had to dig a hole or needed a hole dug, 6 foot deep, about 6 feet wide by 3 feet, and nobody asked any questions why I need that hole dug, he's one of the people I call to dig that hole. Jay is a U.S. veteran of the military, Navy. He was a Navy corpsman, Navy pararescue. He was in the Gulf War. He got out of the military, went to work for Johnson & Johnson, was a medical device guy, was in like the operating room when they would stick stuff and use their stuff. He's an entrepreneur. He's an author. He's the founder of Innermetrix. He's a founder of WizeHire. Wrote 2 great books, What's Your Genius, which opened my eyes to a lot of things that I was not aware of about myself and about other people, and then The Profitable Consultant. And he is the father of 3 amazing boys, husband of a great woman, and stepfather to 2 more great kids, and just an all-around good human being, and one of my best friends, Jay Niblick. What is up?
Not much, man. I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much, brother.
Dude, I've been wanting this one for a while because I think what you offer as far as your expertise and your background and just your practical approach to life, I think it'd be great for the audience to hear. Just a little bit of backstory on Jay and I. We met about 10 years ago. Yeah. He was introduced to me through a mutual acquaintance and came into Max Out. And I didn't know much about the guy, but it turns out that we had so much in common. It was ridiculous. Not just the fact that we're both veterans, but we both have a passion for human behavior and understanding how the mind works and why we do what we do. And my background's in reading people and understanding body language and understanding what makes people tick through personal engagement. And Jay's was more of the scientific background, understanding the metrics as to what makes the brain work and how to interpret that by using science. And when we put ourselves together, we did a lot of damage, just trying to figure out how to use each other's talents. So that's kind of how we started becoming friends.
Good damage.
Good damage. Yeah, absolutely. Good damage. So Jay, let's do a deep dive into you. Find out what your background is, what your story is, who you are, and where you are today. So the question I want to know, and I never asked you this question, I don't think, but at least not that I remember. We have drank a few nights, and I may have asked in a drunken stupor and not remembered, but
several times.
Why are you so interested in understanding how the brain works?
I mean, it started really with an interest in people. Everything I've always done has been altruistically bent. I tried to find more extreme ways of doing that, but I was 17 when I went to college. no nuns, no priests. I majored in Sigma Chi, and failed out in my first semester. So, side story, people argue that I got kicked out of college, and not to sound like an attorney, but I like to argue that the dean called me in and said, "Mr. Niblick, are you planning on coming back the next semester?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Good." So technically that wasn't getting kicked out of college. So I bounced around, did a couple things, found myself working the door at a nightclub in a downtown place, University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And the head bouncer there was a former Marine recruiter, where he had done his stint as a Marine recruiter, and then he got out. And I was just watching the guys around me just, nosedive. I mean, they're staying up until 10 o'clock in the morning and doing drugs and drinking. And I was like, this ain't any place for me. And I wanted to get something different. And I talked to this guy, and his name was Doug. And I said, I got to get out of this. And he said, what are you interested in? And I wanted to do something to help others. I mean, from that moment on, I knew I wanted to do something. And he talked about different programs. And so he coached me through, and I researched getting into the military. And I decided to go Navy because I wanted to get into the medical side. I always fascinated with it. I loved it. And if I hadn't have failed out of college, maybe I'd have gone to med school. Who knows? I was pre-med at the time, but failing out's usually a big black mark against that.
Hold on, let me interrupt you for a second. You can't be pre-med and only go one. Like, you mean your mind might have been pre-med, but you went one semester of college. You were
in my head. That's what I was thinking about doing. But the 17-year-old drinking. I wasn't gonna do that shit. Right. So I said, I want to do something to help people. And so I joined the Navy, and I went off, and I actually wasn't starting out as a corpsman. I did a 6-year contract to do search and rescue. So aviation search and rescue swimmer, the idiot that they always put the idiots in the back of the helicopter to jump out of them because everybody else was smart enough to have a better job. So I went through that program, Pensacola, after boot camp, and then was off to, back in the day, and I won't go too deep into it and waste time, but it was AW, anti-sub warfare, warfare AW. And they switched the squadrons out, and they said, look, we're going from these big Sea Kings down to these LAMP squadrons. The 43s are going away. We want only one person in the back. So we're recruiting for corpsmen. So I switched career tracks to go from the AW rating to the corpsman rating. And I loved it. I got into it. It was fun. I was enjoying the benefit of helping people, but I always wanted to be a little bit edgier than the rest. And so I got into a special operations pipeline on the corpsman side. So, combat and dive school, jump school, NAS Pensacola, or North Island, NAS Coronado out there, and NBA Coronado, Camp Pendleton, a whole bunch of fun schools, a whole bunch of fun programs. Loved my time. Enjoyed the military immensely. In that time, I realized, wow, this is why I want to go back and actually get a degree, do something bigger, because I didn't think I wanted to do that for forever. And I realized the short tenure that may have with it. And that was made manifest on a jump that I was doing out of a helo. It was strictly a training jump. And the helo pitched over, and I was supposed to be going out starboard side. And it pitched, a gust of wind hit it, and it kind of dive boarded me and projected me. And so when I hit the water, the face went straight into the water, and the shock wave went through the mask into the eye, and I lost a fair amount of vision in my left eye. So they said, you can stay in, but you can't do any of this stuff anymore. You can probably go work in a clinic or in a hospital somewhere. And I was like, screw that, F that, I'm out. And so I got out, and, by then was digging ditches in the daytime and waiting tables at night. And I went back to night school. But I had a kid in 1992, my first one. And I had to support him and my wife. So got into school at night and got out. And when I graduated, I got a job with Johnson & Johnson because of my background. I had been a licensed paramedic, and they said, we're looking for medical background folks to be surgical sales consultants. And again, I saw that in the paramedic opportunity. So Johnson & Johnson was, how do I help people? But in the very beginning, to your question, I was always fascinated with why different people did different things. And I wanted to always be involved on the people side of it. What is it that makes this one guy DOR when the next guy next to him doesn't? Drop on request. Why did he quit? Some of these programs had 64% attrition rates. What was the difference? Was it background? Was it education? Was it personality? Was it parenting? It always fascinated me. And so while I was with Johnson & Johnson, my father was a retired college professor, was doing consulting using these things called psychometric instruments. Personality assessments is the misnomer everybody uses. And I was like, dude, this is awesome. You know, this is starting to explain, map, like put shit down in writing and numbers and stuff. This is this person's traits and behavioral characteristics. This is this one. And it was really cool. I mean, I absolutely fell in love with it because it was always intangible. You know, it was like, I think I know this. I can kind of try to observe and watch. But here was this device that was scientifically validated and accurate. And granted, there's a lot of crap out there that's not, but the good ones worked. And it's like, my analogy has always been, you know, why the hell is my car doing that? And nowadays, you know, not like when you and I grew up, but nowadays you can plug something into the OBD reader and this diagnostics prints out and it tells you all the stuff you can't see. You see the symptoms of it, but you can't actually measure it. And so when you see that, you start to understand, why is it performing this way? Why is it not driving that way? And that's just, I fell in love with it, and it's been my life ever since. So started Innermetrix. I am an entrepreneur, and I'm, you know, capitally motivated. So I was going to make the profile that I originally wrote that started Innermetrix, called the Attribute Index, for my own use. And about 4 friends who were also management consultants who said, can I use that? You know, click, well, here's a business model. I'll license this out to as many other management consultants as I can. And it worked. You know,
well, let me ask you this
here, actually.
So your dad was doing this, the prehistoric version of DISC, right? So was he doing the same Marston version, or was it a different version?
He was actually using a profile that was based on the work of a Dr. Hartman, who was a Yale and MIT guy, did a lot of his work at University of Tennessee near the end of his tenure. And fascinating guy, worked with Maslow, because half of the year he would work down in Mexico and half of the year up at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And he worked with Abraham Maslow on the hierarchy of needs. And once you learn his science, so he founded this thing called formal axiology. Dad was using a very early, ugly DOS version of it that the first guy tried to create with a partner of his that coded it and didn't do a good job. He wasn't a great mechanic. And so the stairs were creaky or the car was leaking. So about 25% of the time, it was just crashing and wrong. But I could see enough in it to go, wow, this is really powerful. This one view, you know, axiology, and it's a big fancy word that just means the science of value, how we assign value and think about decisions that we make. I was like, dude, this is awesome. So I was lucky enough to be living in Knoxville again at the time. I was out, and I just went to the Special Collections Library at the university and studied everything I can. I joined the institute there and studied and learned everything I could. My degree was in organizational behavior, so I mean, it was a nice line with what I'd already studied and went to school for. So
I think a lot of people would be interested to know the history of where the DISC and values indexes came from with Marston and what his attributes are, what he had accomplished prior to this, as far as, you know, I guess the Wonder Woman and the lie detector test. So maybe you could tell that story.
Yeah, William Marston was a fantastically amazing guy. He was a very famous psychologist from Harvard. And until him, for the most part, he's kind of credited with it, majority of it. When they were studying the human mind, they wanted to understand what wasn't working, and they studied people in, back then, what they called insane asylums. He was the first to say, why are we looking at the minority of people to make assessments that will understand the majority of the people, you know, or theories that we can apply to the majority of people? So he wrote a book in 1928, which is, you know, this is back then, his seminal piece, The Emotions of Normal People. And he came up with a model that mapped behavior, and it's called DISC, D-I-S-C. Fascinating guy, was primarily responsible, very significantly responsible for developing the lie detector. And he created in his own mind and brought to life the Wonder Woman character. Big woman's right advocate, and said, you know what, in these days, 1920s, 30s, no man of any adult voting age is going to be unprogrammed. That generation is lost. We've got to start with the next generation and teach them to value women like they deserve to be valued. And so he said, what do little kids look at for inspiration, and what do they look up to? And it was cartoons back in that day. And he said, we need a female hero. We need a female cartoon character that's strong and powerful and can start to teach kids of that young generation, hey, you know what? Women are like men. She's standing next to Superman. What the hell? So the DISC model was created around 1928, 26, and 30s. He was working on that. It's been one of the most studied psychometric models or behavioral models that's out there. Many other people have studied it since, Greer, Cleaver, a whole bunch. There's another profile that I've written called the values index. So the DISC index, the index at the end, is my interpretation of Dr. Marston's value. So I wrote the attribute index first. That kind of started the company, realizing there was more room to have different dimensions. You know, blood pressure is cool, but how about an MRI and an X-ray? You know, we need multiple dimensions to understand this human mind. So wrote the DISC index and the values index about 10 years ago. And the values is a third separate science, you know, it's like MRI, X-ray, and blood work. Values is based on Dr. Spronger's work, and it doesn't look at how we behave. It looks at what motivates us, the why. So when we put all three of them together, we look at what natural talents does a person have based on how they think and make decisions, Dr. Hartman. Why are they motivated to use those based on their values and motivations, Dr. Spronger? And how do they use them? Dr. Marston's work from Harvard on behavior and DISC.
I think that's, you know, with when we met, and I didn't know jack shit about DISC or any of the other stuff you're talking about. I was just a guy that understood human behavior through life. I was able, because of my brother and just being able to interpret everything that he wanted and needed. I was just, for whatever reason, acutely aware of body language and changes in people's behaviors and understanding how to figure out why people act a certain way or do a certain thing based on interactions I have with them. And when I found out about DISC, I'm not gonna lie, initially I was like, yeah, bullshit. This isn't going to work. And then I tried to manipulate it and I couldn't manipulate it. And then I'm like, all right, well, let me just take it truthfully. And sure as shit, it was exactly who I was. And I'm like, well, okay, I got to know more about this Jay Niblick guy. Because
I didn't know you had him. If I remember right, I called bullshit on you.
You did. And then we kind of tested each other. We put each other through the ringer. And I can honestly say that the DISC attributes and values indexes are 150% spot on. I use it when I mentor kids. I do a blend of what I do and what you do with them. I have them do self-discovery. I basically do an evaluation of them based on what I'm able to determine about them. I write all that down. Then I have them do a self-discovery and figuring out what their strengths and weaknesses are, where their values lie, what they naturally like to do and don't like to do. And then they write all that down. And then I use your DISCs and values index at the end as kind of like the reveal. And I show them what I wrote and they have what they wrote. And we see what the DISC and the values index shows. And it's literally within a hand grenade on everything, spot on to what they thought and what I thought. I just think it's cool because it just validates. It's like this, just like you talked about with having the blood pressure, the MRI and the X-ray, being able for me to be able to utilize your creation to help validate what they found, what I found, and what science says, to really bring home the fact that these kids now know who they are and can move in a direction that's a little bit more beneficial for them rather than going through what most kids go through, which is this perpetual cycle of figuring shit out, but not really figuring anything out. And that's where we are today as a society and what I'm trying to avoid in anyone I'm coming in contact with. And your tools are vital to that.
Well, and that kind of speaks to why originally Dr. Hartman's work hooked me so much. Because again, it was, you know, how do I serve people at the most extreme level? You know, I don't want to just necessarily, and I'm not saying anybody that does this is wrong. This is what they want. I didn't want to just be in a clinic. I didn't just want to be in a hospital setting. I never did any of that stuff. I wasn't on a ship, you know, diagnosing this illness or that, or working under a physician or something like that. I wanted to be way out there. I wanted to be as extreme as possible to mean that, you know, when that person needed help, that they really needed that help, you know, so that the emergency side, the combat search and rescue side, all of that stuff really, really resonated with me. When I started to hear about Dr. Hartman's work, the original profile I wrote wasn't the DISC and the values, it was Hartman. And here was a guy that was operating at that same level. Now he's a triple PhD. He's not a combat veteran. He doesn't, I wouldn't meet him over at the VFW, you know, because he's passed away. But he grew up in pre-Nazi Berlin and immediately saw this problem with the brown shirts, you know, Hitler's organization, really before he took power. And his first PhD was a doctorate of jurisprudence, a JD. He was a judge. He was an associate judge in Berlin. And he spoke out against these guys to his own detriment, knowing that this was a majority party now that was gaining, and there was, you know, bootleg thugs that were going around killing people and knocking heads in that weren't talking nice about him and stuff. Nothing we don't see any different today in certain regimes. Right. And he wrote an article, you know, Die Freier Hitler, talking about Hitler was a cross-dressing transvestite. I mean, you know, got published. They kicked in the door of his house and he fled out the back, hid in an insane asylum for 6 months. And he was born Robert Schierakauer, and he got a fake passport with Hartman on it, 2 N's at the time, and escaped the country because they were going to kill him. You know, so this guy took on evil at a significant level and said, this is extreme because I want to figure out how to help people in the most dire of circumstances. And I'm watching World War II ramp up. And it's just a fascinating story. All these guys are fascinating stories. You know, Walt Disney actually got him out into Switzerland and brought him into Mexico and then immigrated him up into the United States.
Really?
Yeah. And he fought his whole life to understand what is it that allows somebody to define and organize evil, like he witnessed personally as a young man, watching the organization of evil on a mass scale, nationwide, you know, axis-wide. And he said, how do we understand what is good and what is evil, and how do people make those decisions, and how do we determine it? This is what's good and what's not good, and who gets to define what that is, and can we define that? He created what is pretty much the precursor to today's 401k. Okay, he created the first profit sharing committee in the United States back in the 40s. Got guys like Mr. Johnson and Goodyear, and he got the guys that started some of these big companies, or the early, you know, sons and owners of them, to sit down and say, revenue share. If you share revenue with the employees in a profit sharing kind of mentality, that's an intrinsic valuation. One of the key valuations that he used, I won't go into, but that will create greater value in those individuals. They'll perform more, be more loyal, and the company itself will grow. And all the economists and accountants are going, you're an idiot, you know, and they're sitting there whispering in Mr. Goodyear's ear, you know, what the hell is he talking about? This is stupid shit. You give more money to the employees, there will be less money. It's simple, you know, and he proved his case, and we see it today. So this is a guy, as were the others, that wanted to make a change in helping people as grand as possible. And so from that little inspiration, the idea was the same. How do I benefit people by myself? If I've got 1,000 consultants out there, and we're at about 1,600 now in 53 countries, that's 1,600 people that are helping these individuals understand themselves better. Corporations understand them, picking jobs that are better, working together better as teams, helping each other understand. But, you know, a lot of it really comes down to understanding, like the research study we were talking about earlier, understanding what it is that your natural talents are and how do you align that so you can just, you know, have a better life.
One of the cool things that, and hopefully you have What's Your Genius sitting nearby you so we can hold that up. But when I read that book, and I don't read, you know that. I hate to freaking read.
I got a picture coming out for you.
Yeah, I need the picture book. Maybe the audio. But I read it because I wanted to understand why you were so passionate about what you do. I didn't really read it with the intention of learning anything about anything specific other than what drives you. And what I got out of it, while I thought it was going to be a business book, which you know how much I despise that, it wasn't. It was actually much, while it has a business shift, you know, it's meant for consultants or people that are in that world, I think, initially. But I think what I got out of it was how to understand more about identifying things that I knew about people, or I wanted people to know about themselves, but I didn't know what to call it. and calling it your genius made sense to me. Like things became very clear to me after I read that, like understanding, your inherent strengths and weaknesses, and where do you spend and value time? And do you spend a lot of time working on the things that you suck at, or are you okay with just becoming marginally less sucky if you do? And are you, like all those things that I knew I was doing, but I didn't really have a name for, and I didn't know what to call them. I was now able to call them something. And to me, it was awesome, because I now have something I can utilize that I wasn't really planning on learning from it, that I now use every single day, all the time. I use What's Your Genius, and this is no lie. I use What's Your Genius principles more in my life than I do just about any other business type shit that I learned throughout. Without a doubt, I use that every day. And I never would have thought that I was going to get that out of your book. So let's talk about What's Your Genius. Why did you decide to write that book? And what was the end result that you got out of What's Your Genius, and how did that propel you moving forward in your entrepreneurial career?
So thank you, by the way, because now I just need to find the one other person that bought that book. So now that I know it's
I think there was a few.
I said when I'm standing on the line trying to figure out why is this guy DOR and why is this guy not, or I didn't have any way to really define that. But that was an early curiosity of what is it? There's clearly something we don't see. So here I find myself now, CEO of Innermetrix. We've got, at that point, maybe 900 or 1,000 consultants around the world. We've got metrics coming in by the butt ton. I mean, just metric butt tons of data coming in. All right.
Butt ton. That's an official term, by the way.
Yes,
butt ton.
Yes, it is. If your college professor in statistics doesn't acknowledge that, just change majors. Metric butt ton is absolutely very real. And we had shit ton of it coming in. And I realized, I was like, well, now there's actually a chance. We see performance metrics. And you're right, it's written in a business context. I mean, it's not written like personal relationships or how do I, business, life coaching or anything like that. But we've got performance metrics. We've got a force of 1,000 consultants out there. We've got psychometrics metrics. We've got the personality data that's there. Why do we see populations of people? It's just the same. There's some that are always succeeding and never give up and always do well and perform, and others that don't. Is there some gene? Is there some trait in the 120 things that we can measure in all these profiles? There's 120 data points, titles, strategic planning ability and empathy and self-esteem or self-belief or problem solving. There's 120 of these things that we can measure. It was this just, like mind-numbingly nagging question. Can we look at that and find out if there's any correlations? If you have these 5, then kick ass, you're going to always succeed. And if you don't have these 5, you're always going to fail. So we had about, 300,000 or 400,000 profiles originally, and we needed performance metrics with the personality assessment. So it came down to about 197,000 people. But that was the impetus. That's what started this, was can we find this magic mix of personality traits that, if they always correlate with top performance. And we said it has to be across the board. We knew that, if you're in sales, certain traits correlate with performance. If you're in support or service or engineering or management, certain traits are going to help you succeed in those certain roles. But universally, this way, that way, from ground level to the CEO, from this industry to that industry, were there some magic set of traits? So started crunching it. Got a PhD team to be looking at it. It was 7 years of data that had been collected to get to the 197,000 people. And the PhD team came back, and I remember the first meeting. It was a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of stress with a lot of hope behind it, and said, no, there's not. And I was like, fuck. Seriously? Said, yeah, no, there's no statistically significant correlations that cover all roles, all industries. In other words, it didn't exist. There wasn't this magic set of 4 or 8 that if you had them, you're good. And if you didn't, So what they found, however, were 2 things that did have a very high statistically significant correlation. And that was self-awareness and authenticity. Now, we talked about them in different terms, but those ended up being the names that I gave them. And I wrote a white paper about it. If you don't like reading business books, I found out that unless you're in academia, no business person or anybody that works for anyone on the entire planet cares about a white paper. Now, some people listen to this and be like, oh, dude, that's my jam. I love it. But nah, the vast majority of people are like, what the hell? I don't care about this. So we had this fantastic message. We found something really cool, basal, being neat, you know, and everybody should know it. And then you put that with me. I want to impact the world and help people on as grand a scale or as significant a scale as I can. I got to get this out there. So we decided, let's write a book, because the white paper nobody was listening to. So the book, What's Your Genius, was originally, we didn't even have a genius. The reason it's the genius level is there were 4 levels of performance, from below average, average, above average, and excellent. And as we were interviewing managers, they started talking about certain people, and excellent wasn't cutting it. They were coming up with their own description going, yeah, no, they're better than excellent. They're above excellent. They're masters at this. They're a genius at this. And it seemed to be a pretty common term that they started talking about genius. So we split it up into 5 levels of performance. And genius was the nickname. Instead of like super excellent, we just called it genius. And so what correlated with the best performers, any industry, anywhere, and best, by the way, defines satisfaction and performance in the role, was self-awareness and authenticity. Self-awareness is, how well do you know your natural talents, the inner workings of that car? Do you really know what your greatest strengths are? And the average score for typical Joe on the street was about a 5.5 out of 0 to 10 scale. So stop anybody on the street or anyone listening to this right now or in the recorded version later, quickly, right now, in the next 5 seconds, blurt out your top 5 greatest strengths, behavioral strengths. Go. And if we waited 5 seconds, most everybody's going, oh shit, this. And they start to think right then and there. The average top performer in the genius level was more like an 8.7, 8.5. If I said to them, what are your 5 greatest strengths? They went strategic thinking, grit, determination, self-motivation, attitude, and I'm a proactive person. I mean, it was like they had it laminated on the back of a card. Same thing with, what do you suck at? What are your 5 weakest talents? What are you not great at? Same thing. Boom, 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 boom. You know? So that was the first thing, getting to know you as the tool, what it is, what are the limitations, what are you naturally gifted for based on your neural networks, how you think and make decisions, things that have been programmed since, you know, before you were born, and what are your weaknesses. Then we found a class of people that knew that, but they weren't authentic. So you have to have both. Authentic is, do you know you're a screwdriver and you keep acting like a freaking hammer? You know, do you know you're a Volkswagen and you're trying to race with Porsches, or you're an off-road vehicle trying to race Le Mans, you know, or you're trying to fly when you're a boat? You got to figure out what's the role that's best for me. And I don't just mean job, because there's a lot of variation in all these roles, but how do I go about it? And so what we learned was, people would say there's this weakness, and we all grew up in school hearing the same thing. I don't care where in the world you are. Best students get A's in everything. And so if you're not great in math, but you're great in history or social studies or English, get good in math, you know, because it assumes that everybody can have natural talents in everything. And we all knew it. You find a weakness. What's the first thing that most people think of when they identify a weakness? When you say you want to improve performance and you've identified a weakness, what's next? Fix the weakness.
Right. Work harder.
Yeah. Fix the weakness. It's a leftover appendage from an industrial era mindset, where when everybody was manually contributing, that was the majority of the workers' contribution was physical. You could teach everybody, you know, like scientific management principles, Taylorism says everybody has to do the one best way. And we teach everybody to pick up the widget, turn it 90 degrees, put it on top, push that in, lay it down, push it on. You know, everybody can adapt to do the same thing in the same way because it's physical for the most part. But today's workers are all intellectual. You know, it's Drucker called it the knowledge worker economy, or the intellectual economy. 80% of the US GDP is built by service and what happens in between people's ears. You can't tell everybody to think the same way. And so, but we still bring that legacy of, well, you got a weakness for this. You're not very organized. You're not detail oriented. Get detail oriented. But if the detail orientation is a manifest of how you think and make decisions, you can't rewire your brain to all of a sudden be this incredibly organized person. Maybe you're a free-flowing, artistic, creative, innovative person, And that's not going to be two strengths that you hold in common. You can't. Wonder Woman, Marston made Wonder Woman and he says this, the only fictional person ever to exist that has high D, high I, high S, and high C, possesses all of them to maximum levels. Doesn't happen. Every one of the top performers we studied, and we studied a lot, interviewed a lot of them in the book. Tony Robbins wrote the foreword for it. We talked to guys like Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, top surgeons at Harvard, top explosive ordnance person on the planet, the CEO of Pizza Hut. I mean, all these people said the same thing. There are a lot of things I suck at, and I'm never going to get better at it. I've tried for 10 years, 30 years. I failed miserably every time, and I've wasted thousands of hours trying to make myself a big strategic thinker when I'm really just a practical, myopic guy. Or I'm an introvert. I'm always going to be an introvert. I can go to the National Speakers Association. They can teach me all the techniques and tricks I want to speak. But if you're a natural introvert, you're never going to be the world's greatest extrovert. It's not going to happen. So self-awareness, authenticity. The best performers figure it out first by studying what are they good at. Taking stuff like the DISC Plus, any assessment. If it's a good, valid assessment, be careful. There's a lot of crappy ones out there, but avoid the shit and take a really good one. Learn it. Learn what you're great at. But then don't say, that's what I'm weak at. Now I got to go fix it. The best performers go, sweet, I know I suck at that. How do I not have to depend on sucking at that? And it's a simple concept. How do I do a job without having to depend on something I'm naturally not good at? And a lot of times people decide to change jobs.
I think one of the things that I've found when I took the DISC, I found I was 67 out of 100 in D, I, and S,
yep,
and like a 3 in C. So for people that don't understand what DIS is, D is dominant, so like the more alpha male-ish kind of personality. I is an influencer, so the more outgoing-ish kind of person. S is somebody who is willing to sit back, look at things, make decisions based on gathering all the information. And then C is the more compliant person, data-driven, minutia-driven, likes details, facts. So I was 67 out of 100, which is anything above 50 is a stronger trait, and then like almost a -3 in C, because I honestly don't give a shit about the details. Never have. But I would have never guessed that about myself until I took the test. And then I read, Jay's reports are 54 pages, if I'm not mistaken. The DISC Plus is 54 pages. And the amount of information that yielded for me personally just validated everything I already knew about myself, but it also gleaned information that I didn't even know existed, where I would have never looked for those things when I was, doing some self-awareness and self-assessment. So for me, it was amazing to get that information, and I've used it hundreds of times since with clients of mine. So when you wrote What's Your Genius, and what I got out of that was this understanding that it's okay to suck at stuff. It's okay for people to understand that if you suck at something, there's two ways I look at things. Do you suck at it because you're lazy and you don't try, or do you suck at it because you just intrinsically or inherently don't have a skill or a talent for it? And getting kids, especially who have yet to figure out that stuff, to understand effort and what that means. And if you put effort into something, what does the result look like? And if you suck at something and you're putting effort into it and you still suck at it, then you probably just suck at it. And then my job as a mentor is to limit the amount of ways that you suck. Like put you in positions where you minimize your weaknesses and maximize your strengths.
Yeah, and you got to be honest with yourself. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to be the guy that says, I don't want to tell you have weaknesses and it's just opportunities for development. Fuck that. There's things that we suck at. You have to define, am I sucking at the results of this because I'm being lazy, because I'm not putting forth enough effort, because I'm not trying? And there's a lot of stuff that you can push through and succeed with the effort and the grit and the determination and the hunger. That's got to be there. Can't take that away. But if you're doing that and you still find yourself getting drained by doing it. So imagine, here's a great example of the lessons of What's Your Genius. You're owning a company and you realize that you're going to have to take on the majority responsibility for accounting because you're a solopreneur. And so you're going to do that because you don't want to outsource. You don't want to pay somebody else to do it. So you're going to do it. And you're going to do the paperwork and the receipts and the invoices and accounts receivable and accounts payable. You're going to take care of all this for your business. And you're a a 3C. It's kind of funny because you're like a lot of other people, myself included, and you're like, I don't even remember exactly what the score was because it's a small detail and I don't really care about them. You're going to find yourself taking 3 times as much effort to get that and to only achieve a nominal result in the end. You're still going to have numbers that are off, and you're still going to have typos in your documents, and you're going to forget to send out bills, and you're going to be disorganized in that regard. That's an example. The person gets into a job for something that they love to do, and they're like, oh, a big part of the responsibilities is you have to do all this stuff. In saying, well, I just got to push through and make myself happen, stop being a little wussy, whiny baby, shut up, life ain't perfect, suck it up, and, welcome to the suck. You got to deal with it. Great. But if that's your career, you're killing yourself. You're never going to reach the heights of performance, which means outcome and satisfaction, by having a significant portion of your job dependent on things that you got to work 3 or 4 times as hard to do because they're just not natural talents. So you have to always define, is this something that's based on, and the book really does go into helping you understand, is it a natural talent based on my neural networking? Because if I'm 40, and in my case, I'm 50, I ain't changing 50, almost 1 years, because it starts to be wired before I'm born. I can't change that overnight. That's slow to change, many, many years. It's not carved in stone at 18. We change over the years, but we're talking 5, 10, 15 years. We slowly evolve and our neural networks slowly change. So I can't read a book and say, oh, I need to become the perfect strategic thinker because I got to run this business. The smart person that's at the genius level says, I suck at it. I appreciate that. I'm just going to find a way to go around it, meaning I'll outsource that to an accountant. I'll bring a consultant in to help me with strategic planning. I'll change the way I go about my job so I can achieve the objective without having to go through my pain of my suck. Remember Nimitz hopping in World War II? That's a huge stronghold. It's going to be a weakness for us because we're going to go through it. There's going to be really high casualties, big head count, mortal. It's just going to be bad. Wait a minute. I want to get to point B. Who says I got to go through these islands? Right. Who's going to go around them? He negated the weakness, as we would call it here in this analogy, by going around it. He found a way to get to his objective without having to go through the stuff that clearly was going to suck.
I think one of the cool things I've learned and gained from the entire process of knowing you and learning more about DISC and values and attributes and all that stuff is it's not just a business thing. Like I use it a lot. I didn't, I can't tell you how many times I sat in Jay's house or on his deck or his patio or on the phone, lamenting my situation with Max out and my lack of time and how much effort I was putting out and how little return I was getting back. And, I wasn't necessarily the best student, but what I've learned is that it's not just a business tool. It's a life tool. Like I can utilize my knowledge that I gained from that in how I parent, how I have relationships with my wife. Cause I learned, I know my wife took the DISC test. I know what her personality profile is. I understand what her values and attributes are. And I understand how she likes to be spoken to. And she understands how I like to be spoken to. And we can communicate better because we understand each other better. And I think my kids, they all took it. And it was a game where I assessed them first, and then because I have to do that, and then have them take it, and then they go, "Oh my God, Dad, you're awesome." That was the whole game for me. Maybe not for them, but learning how to communicate with people better and learning how to have relationships and interpersonal skills at home and at work. Because I think a lot of times, and you as a consultant and having consultants all around the world, one of the biggest things they do is they help companies run better by figuring out, okay, if a company hires a consultant, an Innermetrix consultant says, our numbers are down and our sales are down or whatever, and they do an assessment and they find out that 2/3 of the sales force aren't meant to be in sales because they just don't have the metrics for that. They're more inclined for HR maybe, and helping a company reassign or figure out where their problem lies and take guys that aren't meant to be in sales out of sales and reallocate them.
Or and bring them.
What's that?
Or a different type of sale.
Or a different type of sales, right. But I mean, I think that's huge.
Yeah, the client evolved to a point in the society where they couldn't sell the way they had, but the national sales manager grew up that way 18 years ago, and that's the way he always did it. And by golly, you're going to do it the same way. They needed a whole different idea on how to sell, and the top performers didn't fit the mold. So it's not even I didn't mean to interrupt you on that one. It's just, it doesn't mean you have to leave the role. It means if you've got latitude to try to get the same objectives done in a different way, right. The duck shouldn't try to get to the farmhouse by, climbing a tree and jumping onto the roof. The squirrel shouldn't try to swim to the farmhouse. All the animals can go to the same barn, but they got to take what's best for them to get there. And so the same job, if business is smart, they allow that latitude to a certain degree to let people find their own path to getting the same objective, whether that's making the same number of calls or monitoring the same, production schedules or managing or leading people. It's got to be flexibility. There's a latitude there that, there's margins on that. Obviously, you can't go too far out. And that's what we see oftentimes is you're either in a job where if you have the ability to go do it a slightly different way, you can succeed really well and be very satisfied. It's just, you got to stop trying to be what they are. Somebody that taught you how to do it has a different set of talents and they're telling you how to do it. That's great. Learn all the stuff you can, but it's not everything. You have to then apply that to you, because you doing them ain't ever going to work. You got to do you, And I think that, I'm so far away from this job, I'm never going to be able to do me and still do this. And they leave and go find a different role.
I think it's a good transition point, because one of the things I want to make sure we talked about before the show ended was the newest venture. Obviously, you still have Innermetrix. Innermetrix is growing, killing it. You got a lot of great people, including soon to have your son in the fold running some stuff. And but you have guys all over the country. You have Alan and everybody that's killing it, helping you grow Innermetrix has allowed you to go and start another venture, utilizing some of the stuff that you learned over the last 20 years doing Innermetrix to create WizeHire, which is solving another problem. That's, when I come to you, like I come to you for everything, business wise and personal. And it's because I know how your brain works, and I know that we work the same way, but yours is at a much higher plane. And so when I see you doing things like creating another company like WizeHire, and we talked about this before we went live on how that came about, I'm just in awe by it. So let's tell everybody about WizeHire and what that does, and why it was created, and what the need was that you saw, and how you're fulfilling it.
Same drive. I think it's probably been there my whole life. There's a big population of people that weren't benefiting from these profiles. So the 1,600 consultants that we have are master trained. They're going through years of training, 6 months of certification. These people really get to know these profiles very well, because we're super protective of that information. Are they using it in an efficacious manner? Are they going out? We won't let them stay. They won't pass. We fail people. You can't just say, yeah, here's what this profile means, and I'm going to wing the shit from my hip, and you should fire that guy. We're really careful about who they are. So they're operating at a very high level. That comes with an expense. So corporations that use them are paying good money to use them. When it came to hiring, we saw this whole big, you got the corporate pyramid here. Above the certain line, and it moves, but above a certain line here and above, they'll pay for that consultant to come in and spend the thousands of dollars or $10,000 to, we've seen $50,000 and $75,000 contracts for a year. Even if it's down to, I just want some help with this, it's going to be a couple grand minimum to get somebody of that caliber to come in and help you. So they wouldn't use it on the majority under that line. Supervisors, hourly employees, manufacturing employees, customer service, the vast majority of salespeople, they weren't benefiting from it. So we said, man, we've got to have some way to allow this same technology to benefit all those people, which constitute the majority of the workforce. And so Sid, my co-founder, and I said, well, if we can create algorithms that do that for them, do what the consultant's mind would, obviously nowhere near as in depth. And the output is simply a proximity of excellent to poor fit for a job. That's all it can do. It requires a human to interpret that and connect it to the environment and the business and do coaching and leadership development and stuff. But when it came to that big population of small to medium-sized businesses, and we've got some billion-dollar companies that are clients using it, 150,000, 130,000 employees. But the majority are small to medium-sized businesses that can't get access to those consultants, are never going to pay $5,000 to have them help hire a customer service person or a front clerk at a hotel or a bank teller or, something like that. A real estate agent, that's one of the areas we started to specialize in early on. So WizeHire was, again, motivated from that same reason. It's working over here. There's a whole population of people that aren't getting better jobs, that are lined up better with their natural talents, so they don't have to suck at most of what they do all day long. And, nobody wants to get paid to suck, because that is just, miserable. And all these polls have been done on engagement, and as high as like 53% have said that they're in a Gallup poll, and a Harris poll did one. And as high as 53% of people are unengaged or disengaged, lack engagement in their job. They're doing it because they need to, so they can get some money, so they can pay some bills and show up again tomorrow to do it again. And they do the bare minimum. And what an existence is that,
Well, it's funny. So I'm going to do a little example of what, I work in a small police department, and we have 8 guys in the borough of Collegeville, 1.6 square miles, 5,000 people, 8 police officers, little Mayberry town. And everybody on the police department had at least 18 years on the job. I was the last person hired. I had 13 years of experience before I even got hired, and I've been there for 13 years. And so 13 years ago was the last time they hired anybody. And our sergeant, who was with the department for 41 years, just retired, and we had to hire somebody. And I'm using this example because it highlights understanding who you want for a job. So my chief said, I'm thinking about not going the regular route, which is to have some outside chiefs come in, panel of 3 or 4 chiefs come in. They interview all the candidates, and they force rank them based on a scale of 100%, and they grade them, and they say these are our top 3 candidates, and this is who we think you should hire. Because he said to me, because I don't think it's smart to have 3 people on the outside who know nothing about us and nothing about our business, nothing about what we do here, determining who the next person is when we haven't hired in 13 years. This is a huge moment for us to hire somebody who's going to be here for the next 25 years, hopefully. So myself, our detective, and another officer, we're the hiring team. We did the interviews because we knew the profile of the person we wanted, and we were going to pick the person that we were going to work with for the next X amount of years, not some random person doing that. So essentially what we did on a very small scale is what a company can do with WizeHire. They can create a profile of the candidate they want, put it into the WizeHire funnel, and WizeHire will force rank based on 100, just like we did for our candidate, and say, this is the best candidate for the job based on your metrics that you want.
Yeah, there's a myth in hiring that you have to remove the subjectivity, and it's just bullshit. You want as much subjectivity as possible to a certain degree, because you just did exactly what we coach people to do. You're going to know the role better than anybody else because you're in it. Outsiders aren't going to know. A consultant, unless they've worked in that industry for countless years with bunches and bunches of clients, or did it themselves and then they got out and became a consultant, they have to know it. So the subjective part is humans with emotions and subjective opinions going, but I know what I'm doing, and I don't like the fit on this individual. I do like the fit on that individual. That's healthy. You have to have objective parts as well. And so what they're usually trying to do there is get some total strangers to be objective. They don't know any of the candidates. They don't know you guys. And they fool themselves into thinking, oh, that's going to be perfect. This will be objective and it'll be fair and rational, but it's detached. If you can get an assessment, any assessment that's validated, if you can get them, that's the objective part, because it's blind. If good assessment has done the studies to make sure that it doesn't discriminate against any protected class or race or gender or ethnicity, and it's the objective part, that it's the standard rule that everybody's going to get a score that's the exact same. And so that's the best of both. You get the subjectivity of the humans who are doing it. I mean, we're big fans in hiring of getting the teammates on that team to help interview and hire that person, because you're going to work with them every day. You should do that.
Yeah.
how crazy is it to say, hey, here's your new employee. None of you have ever met them before, but we didn't want you guys to bias the decision. Whatever.
I just think it's a brilliant, you saw the need, you saw that you were feeding the 20% of the population with the Innermetrix business, and that there was an 80% area where no one was touching, and everybody was going through the antiquated process of taking applications or going through Monster or any of the other hiring websites, the application websites for businesses to post jobs. But there was no metrics to weed out the nonsense and just get the candidate that is best equipped or potentially best equipped for the position. And I think it was great to be able to do that.
It's just as important for the person looking to get the job. If we can figure out what's the best match, job fit, match, whatever, why the hell wouldn't we?
Right.
I mean, if we have access to this knowledge, why the hell wouldn't we use it? So, our aspiration is to literally change the way the world does hiring at WizeHire. I mean, we're thinking big because it's a broken paradigm. I mean, it's ugly, the stuff that's out there and how people make decisions. And I always say, and I'll shut up and let you finish it, but it's kind of like Match.com. And I am not misogynistic, but this will sound it. It's Match.com, and the guy's the only one with buttons and control.
Right.
The woman says, I'm available for dating. And the guy does all the deciding, and you could flip it around where the woman does the company makes all the decisions. The company evaluates this individual. They have all the cards. They're the experts in hiring. Even if they're not, they've been trained. They've got more experience than most candidates do applying for jobs. They're by no means, they're at a disadvantage. And they get, here's your compensation. Here's a description of what the job's going to be like. And, you get to talk about us and ask any questions you want, but it's a severe disadvantage. So the job seeker can level that playing field now by having assessments that help them assess how well the job fits them, just as well as corporations typically do at assessing if the person fits them. And if we can even it out, and it's there, the science is there, the data is there, why the hell? Let's get it better fit. And it's working. We chose one of the first verticals as real estate because it's a true profession. 6-figure income is pretty common for people that have established a career and stayed in it 20, 30 years. And they had a 90% failure rate. 9 out of 10 new agents that got into real estate failed to survive. Just 2 years. So we were like, can we go there and fix that? Our teams that are using us are more like a 30% failure rate. And some attrition is good, healthy. So, seems like it's working.
Well, I love it. And I wish we could do this all night, but we got to wrap this thing up because we got about a minute and a half before I'm going to be over my time. But thank you, first of all, for doing this. I know you're busy and you got a lot of shit going on in your world as well, but I appreciate you coming on. I hope that we share some really insightful stuff with people to understand about DISC and about values and about what makes them tick and how they can learn more about it. There will be a link, everybody, that I posted this earlier, but Jay's been gracious enough to allow everybody access for free to their own profile so they can go and take the assessment and find out more about themselves. We're going to come back on here in a couple of weeks, hopefully, to if anybody does take advantage of that link, we can talk about, answer questions. It's not going to be a podcast. It's just going to be a Facebook Live thing. Jay, is there any websites, any information, anything you want to share with everybody before we're done?
For the individuals that are out there looking to figure out how to get self-aware and be authentic about it, I'll shamelessly plug the book. Go check out What's Your Genius. Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, you name it, it's out there. If you're a corporation, you're looking for some help, check out Innermetrix, Innermetrix, or WizeHire with a Z, WizeHire. But individuals, take the assessment, take the link. It's going to stay up there as long as this video is in existence, and figure out what it is you're great at and figure out what you suck at. It's going to make a big difference.
I agree. Well, brother, I appreciate you being on. Hang tight. Don't go anywhere. Everybody, thank you for watching another episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I am your host, Matt Cubbler. Once again, my special guest was Jay Niblick. And for God's sakes, be kind to one another. Thank you. Take care, guys.